Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and welcome. My name is Yolian Ogbu, and I'd like to thank you all in joining us for this critical and timely webinar. October 1st marked the start of the 5th International Month of Action against AFRICOM, which is the U.S. Africa Command, organized by the Black Alliance for Peace. The title of this webinar today is also the theme for this year's Month of Action. It's titled 21st Century Neocolonialism, Capitalism, Compradors, and the Ongoing Scramble for Africa. Every year, organizations around the world endorse and participate in this Month of Action, standing united against the United States' ongoing military presence in African nations across the continent. This webinar is the kickoff for the Month of Action, so you will hear from voices from the African continent and the diaspora expressing the need for the complete withdrawal of U.S. troops and a complete end to the combatant command. And our hope is that following the webinar, you will be inspired to engage in a month of autonomous and semi-autonomous actions and events designed to elevate this issue in the public consciousness around the world and build the global movement necessary to end AFRICOM and U.S. imperialism in its totality. We'll be hearing from a very diverse group of panelists here. We'll see how these panelists ground our discussion in a materials analysis, examining the concrete economic drivers of neocolonialism and the role of revolutionary organization in confronting the comprador class that facilitates this imperialist exploitation on the continent. We'll also hear folks bring a crucial perspective from the front lines of popular struggle, speaking to the realities of what, say, Akil Mbembe have theorized as Africa as a site of experimentation for new forms of control and extraction, and how Pan-African solidarity is key to resisting it. We'll also illuminate how the brutal continuity of imperialist plunder in the Congo, for example, the heart of the ongoing scramble for Africa, connecting the historical struggle against colonialism to the contemporary fight against 21st century neocolonialism and its corporate enablers. We'll also expand our understanding of imperialism beyond the military sphere, which is just as important, detailing how, say, the digital frontier is representing this new terrain for exploitation. We'll talk about workers' dignity, workers' rights, and how this embodies a new form of resistance against capitalism and imperialism at large. Before we hear from our distinguished panelists, I'd like to briefly introduce the Black Alliance for Peace and our mission. The Black Alliance for Peace is an alliance that seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. Through educational activities, organizing, and movement support, we work to oppose both militarized domestic state repression and the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the U.S. state globally. Central to this work is our U.S. out of Africa Shut Down AFRICOM campaign. BAP created the U.S. out of Africa network to serve as the organizing arm of this campaign. We demand the right to sovereignty and self-determination for African peoples, and this must include the closing of all U.S. and NATO military bases in Africa. Now, we are privileged to have with us a set of panelists who will help us unpack this year's theme from the variety of essential perspectives I've laid out earlier. So as we proceed, please remember to add your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box located at the bottom left of your screen, I believe, next to the chat box. So we're going to do our best. I'm sorry, I think that might be bottom right. We'll do our best to answer as many of these questions during the Q&A portion of our webinar, so stay tuned. And without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is going to be Ms. Ashlyn Adhiambo, is a member of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya and is currently serving as the Secretary of International Affairs. She's a committed political facilitator in the party school known as the Pio Gama Pinto Institute, as well as she's a popular educator in some exchange programs. Thank you, Ms. Ashlyn Adhiambo. This goes to you.
Great salute, comrades. I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, greetings, and I am happy to be here today. Let me start by saying that across the global south, The working class and its vanguard parties and also progressive movements are confronted with burning questions. And these are: what is the correct character of our national struggle? What is their dialectical connection to the
Hold on just
global?
a second. Ashlyn, hold on. We're getting a message in the chat that people cannot hear you.
Okay.
Netfa, is there something we can fix for that?
I don't know why that is, because I can hear.
I hear her very clearly.
A lot
Other
of people are saying they
we
can't
can
hear too. So it might be the person who can't hear or the people who can't hear. Maybe they're not in a language channel at all or something like that. I don't know.
Okay. Well,
You have to-
since other people are saying they can hear, we're going to just go right ahead. And those of you who cannot, you've got some tech issue to deal with. All right, go right ahead, Ashlyn. Continue.
Thanks, comrade. So, what is the correct character of our national struggles? What is their dialectical connection to the global anti-imperialist front? How do we ensure that our revolutions grow organically from the specific contradictions of our own societies rather than mechanically imitating foreign models divorced from our material realities? So this theme, known as the 21st century neocolonialism, capitalism, comparator, and ongoing scramble for Africa, is not just an academic exercise. It reflects the living, breathing class enemies character who exploit our people daily, in the fields, in the informal settlements, in factories, in markets, in the corridors of government, and yes, sometimes even within the very progressive movements and political parties. Today we will discuss the three core components of our theme. That is the economic system of capitalism, its local agents, that is the comparator class, and its modern manifestation, that is the ongoing scramble for Africa. So I'll start with the class, that is the comparator class. But in Kenya, we call them the comparator and bureaucratic capitalist class. These are two arms of the same beast. So the comparator and bureaucratic capitalism in the neocolonies. So what actually is this? The enemy must not be an abstract shadow. It must be identified, named, and studied within with scientific clarity. In Kenya, the bourgeoisie is not a national class, or it doesn't hold a national character. It's not revolutionary, it's not productive. It is a servant class, a comparator and bureaucratic elite that survives only by licking the boots of imperialism. Comparator capitalism is the economic arm of foreign dominance. Comparators are intermediaries. They are the local agents of foreign capital, tasked not with building, but with managing subsidiaries of transnational corporations. Could be in mining, telecommunication firms, finance, or even logistic companies. Their duty is to ensure that the pipeline of profits flow unbroken from the sweat of the African workers to the vaults of European and American capital. These comparators may not always be seen in parliament, but they rule nonetheless. From boardrooms, investment conferences, and chambers of commerce, their task is singular: to extract surplus and channel it to their imperialist masters. They do not build factories, they build bank accounts. Externally, they do not invest in the nation, they traffic in its ruin. Bureaucratic capitalism, on the other hand, is the political instrument of imperialist control. Here we find rented politicians, state technocrats, and military officers whose purpose is to protect imperialist interests through the machinery of the state. They do not govern, they administer imperialism affairs. They wear African faces, but they speak the language of foreign capital. In Kenya, these two classes are not parallel tracks. They are one twisted rope. The compounder and bureaucrat capitalists are often the same person, owning a logistic firm on one hand and sitting in a government committee on the other hand, controlling real estate empires while passing land policy in some spaces, brokering imperialist loan by day, yet imposing austerity measures by night. This class could more be called the compounder bureaucratic bourgeoisie. And I like to say that since compounders depend on imperialism for their survival, they are the most reactionary class in Kenya. They work to ensure that Kenyans do not advance. They ensure that Kenya does not develop along an independent economic path. And as that would undeniably harm their interest and those of their masters. So even as we think about the compounder class, we need to also think about this bureaucratic class. So essentially, this class is highly organized within the halls of governments and top-level management of imperialist firms. They are highly conscious, and I mean class conscious, and openly wage class war while distracting the masses with tribal narratives as well as identity politics. State power is exclusively held by this faction. For them, elections are a way to gauge the strength of different factions among them in order to determine which one will take state power. They mobilize politically along tribal lines as they always as they are always trying to suppress class consciousness among the Kenyan people. Their mobilization depends on enticing poor peasants and the oppressed masses with handouts and coercing others through tribal militia. So essentially, election campaigns are therefore very expensive in Kenya and I'll say generally on the African continent. And the compounder factions rely on imperialists to fund them. And also once they get into power, they carefully ensure that their tribal mobilization do not fully develop into civil wars. So for us is to note that for revolutionaries, this unity of economic and political power in the same class is not a curiosity. It is a strategic fact. It means that Kenya is ruled by a single reactionary bloc with no patriotic wing, no progressive wing, and no capacity for national development. This class must be overthrown, not reformed. It must be disarmed, not debated. It must be exposed, isolated, and smashed through class struggle and armed revolution, not only in Kenya, but all over the world, especially in the neo-colonies. So I'll head straight to neo-colonialism and the scramble of Africa. So comrades, imperialism in its various manifestations poses an existential threat to the sovereignty of African nations and also to the global South. Imperialism today is more insidious than ever. The tactics have evolved, but the goal remains the same. And the goal is always to exploit African resources and the neo-colonies' resources and subjugate the African people. This is particularly evident in the neo-colonial manipulation by the US and France that we witness right now under the guise of militarization or military interventions and economic aid. They continue to prop up regimes that serve their interests and destabilize those who dare to challenge their influence. NATO states and multinationals fuel authoritarianism and militarization through the AFRICOM and foreign military bases. For instance, we have a lot of bases in Djibouti, in Kenya, Proxy forces and mercenaries in Rwanda have been deployed by Rwandan government to be in the DR Congo and Mozambique, and we also see the RSF in Sudan. So economic subordination is also part of this imperialist manipulation, which now sways through to debts, and also we witness austerity measures and now rising NGO capitalist alliance in Africa. These initiatives, such as the AFRICOM, serve as instruments of this imperialist agenda, undermining our autonomy and reducing our countries to mere pawns in the geopolitical chess game orchestrated by the Western powers. These military strategies are designed not to protect our people, but to secure their interests and the interest of their masters, the interest of the compadres and the imperialist masters. In the Sahel region, for instance, France has masked its military presence as counterterrorism effort, but in reality, it is about maintaining control over the resources and also the geopolitical influence in Western Africa. Meanwhile, the US continues to expand its military footprint through AFRICOM, imposing neoliberal economic policies through institutions like the IMF and World Bank. And even right now, we have more, which plunge our nations into acute traps, debt traps, and poverty. In Kenya alone, we host 3 foreign military bases, a glaring testament of the erosion of our sovereignty. These bases are not just symbols of military presence, they represent a direct violation of our independence. Our institutions, of our independence, those of our institutions, and the dignity of our people. They subjugate our military and intelligence agencies to the whims of US imperialism, turning them into extensions of foreign powers. This scenario is replicated across the continent, where foreign military presence is a common thread in the tapestry of imperialist domination. And equally talking about this kind of features in Africa, I need also to speak about the specter of a war that is already hunting us, as conflict rage on multiple fronts. In West Asia, the struggle against Zionist aggression is an anti-imperialist, anti-fascist war. In Eastern Europe, we witness the brutal realities of NATO-backed conflict in Ukraine. And in East Asia, tensions smear around Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula, echoing the same imperialist ambitions in all these regions of the world. We must expose and resist these tactics, recognizing that imperialist power aim to undermine our sovereignty while consolidating their control over our land, labor, and wealth. We seek to uproot these systems of oppression and build a socialist Africa, free from external domination. The reliance of imperialism on proxy wars and economic sanctions reveals its strategic limitations. The imperialist powers fear direct confrontation, knowing the consequences of nuclear escalation. So with this, we can actually see its downfall. While they aim to exhaust nations like Russia, China, Iran, we can turn their war of attrition into decisive victories across multiple theaters of conflict. And we can see this through the alliance of Sahel states. So these victories will not only weaken imperialism and militarization, but will also trigger political and economic collapse on the Western hegemony. So, comrades, I'd like to conclude by saying that our analysis leaves no room for ambiguity. The so-called partnerships and development aids offered to Africa and in the majority of neo-colonies in the 21st century is nothing but a modern gloss of an ancient crime. The ongoing scramble for Africa is a reality driven by the insatiable logic of capitalism in its highest imperialist stage. The system operates through a sophisticated internal alliance of a small class known as the combatant and bureaucratic capitalist class, which functions as a loyal manager for foreign capital, ensuring that our nations remain perpetual producers of raw wealth and eternal consumers of finished goods. This is the modern day slavery. Thank you so much, comrades.
Thank you, comrade, for the incredible presentation and analysis that leads us perfectly into Mr. Mosaab Baba of the Pan-African Forum in Sudan. He is a founding member of the Pan-African Forum Sudan and previously a member of the Girafina movement in Sudan, if I pronounced that right. In recent years, Mosaab has been a lead consultant for the Ain Network, as well as working with the new civic actors after the 2019 revolution. Welcome, Mosaab.
Thank you, Yolian, and thank you, Black Alliance for Peace, for this important event. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I don't want to go too much into details about what's going on in Sudan. We could, there's a lot of aspects to it, and we could be here for maybe days to unpack it fully. So I'll try to keep my presentation a little bit closer to the topic, which is AFRICOM and how there's been coercion on the continent in order to, shed a light on the long-term effects and what we're looking at in the future. So Sudan has been for a long time, experiencing wars and conflicts, but the main kind of trajectory of history with Sudan has been its struggle between a sovereign policy and a sovereign state, and being, held towards the imperial forces and being coerced by them to play a role regionally. And that's the one important thing that we have to understand, is that this war that we're seeing right now is a result of decades of coercing Sudan and coercing the Sudanese nation's discourse to serve as a satellite. When you look at empire, you're looking at a center of the empire, and you're looking at pillars that hold up the empire, and then you have the kind of outskirts of the empire, which is basically what Sudan represents. This history goes back to the 70s. I mean, there's a direct correlation between kind of the dawn of the neoliberal era of imperialism and how Sudan has been kind of fit into that. One of the main turning points was, of course, in the late 70s. That's a big factor because that's when Sudan moved from sovereignty into this neoliberal era. Nimeri in the 70s and the 80s was basically the CIA's man in Africa, and playing that role as far as interacting with different countries in the region. I'm not sure if can y'all hear me?
We can hear you, but it seems to be fading in and out. Not sure.
I am sorry. This is the French interpreter. I am hearing another language in the channel. Can we please check if Creole is on Creole? Thank you.
There's been a lot of phases, but if we had to map out another phase where this has been put, in overdrive as far as the imperial kind of chokehold on Sudan, this was also in the late 90s. Many of you are familiar with the the 7 countries in 5 years. The late 90s, the neocons actually putting forth a plan for the Middle East that included, Sudan, Somalia, included Libya, Iraq, Iran, Syria, as part of a package to kind of neutralize any sovereignty from these countries. And we've seen how that moved, and especially after 9/11, how then each country was invaded, either invaded or coerced. Uh, if you notice, Sudan was on that list, but Sudan was never invaded. Somalia, we've seen how there was an invasion in 2006, unfortunately by Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya. If you look at, of course, Iraq, and then later on after the Arab Spring in Syria, but Sudan was never touched militarily. And basically, that's because there was a compromise of, a couple of things, of allowing South Sudan to separate on its own under the assumption from the imperialists that South Sudan would be another satellite of U.S. policy, which didn't happen. The South Sudanese refused, and it's no coincidence that they've gone into a cycle of perpetual warfare. That's the pattern that's seen time and time again. Empire tries to coerce a country. If it doesn't coerce it, creating groups and militias and extremists and stuff that are pretty much given the green light to sow chaos. And if that doesn't work, then there becomes other measures are taken. So unfortunately, their bag is full of tricks to take away that sovereignty from African nations. The trajectory of Sudan then started changing a little bit, where around 2014, Bashir moved from kind of the resistance axis of Iran and Syria and these countries and went fully into the umbrella of the Gulf countries, along with Egypt. This is because these countries are the countries that are the strongholds of U.S. policy in the entire region. Whether you're talking about West Asia, you're talking about North Africa, you're talking about, the Horn of Africa, you're talking about the greater Middle East, it's their kind of stronghold within the region. Since that switch, then there's been other factors that come along with that. Like, you do a deal with the devil, then the devil will keep on making demands time and time again. So even issues like normalizing relationships with Israel, since 2014, that's been put on the table to the Sudanese leadership, that if you want normal relations and lifting the sanctions and all of that, then you have to take this step forward. From here, I'm going to go briefly across a few slides just to kind of give some visual aid to what I'm saying, and so that the points can be brought across a little bit better. I know I'm already a few minutes into my presentation, but let me try to make it as quick as possible. Okay. So the situation as it stands today is more or less with these, it's more of a Libya situation where you have different forces controlling different areas in Sudan. The main ones, of course, being the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, both of which were under the Bashir regime and acting as one unit, not acting as one unit, but, in unison until the war started in 2023. And this, of course, comes on the heel of a stalemate after the 2019 revolution that says that you can't have two armies in one country, and there needs to be a security sector reform. We have over 120 armed groups with 4 or 5 liberation movements that are active in Sudan. But the idea of, creating an armed group in order to have some kind of say in the country's discourse has become a consistent pattern, since the early 2000s. And, before that, it was mostly the SPLA. But then it became a characteristic of the political process in Sudan. Of course, a lot of this has been kind of pushed by foreign countries to kind of get a foothold in Sudan, and for different reasons. Some are more strategic, like you have Egypt, supporting the RSF and the SAF and its militias, to kind of counteract Egypt, and then counteract Ethiopia. You have the UAE supporting the RSF, and it's been this weird paradigm where you have one of the worst wars that we've seen, I think, in the region for decades going back. And the backers of these wars and of these groups actually don't have a problem with each other. But this is to kind of illustrate who's at war right now and who are their main backers. If you look at Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, these are very close allies of not only the U.S. but of Israel as well, which we'll come to in a little bit. So these are kind of the handlers of empire, in Sudan, and increasingly in the region. So this is one of the things also that go a little bit unseen or not too much attention to, is that the empire doesn't have to come and intervene directly. Once you start looking at how much they've given agency to these countries, you'll see that it becomes an extension of empire. And once you start looking at where Sudan sits and who's to its north and its northeast, and how much military presence there is, it's almost like AFRICOM doesn't need to be physically in Sudan. It's already under the umbrella of a larger security arrangement in the region that is operated through these countries. And this is why you've seen Netanyahu outright, map out who he wants under this umbrella and who he's targeting. And I think it's pretty clear, this was in 2024. So, this year he didn't, bring the blessings map, but he brought the curse map along with him this year as well. But there is an insistence of course, as a lot of you know, of the Greater Israel Project, and how that aligns with the Project for the New American Century here in the U.S. And it kind of goes in parallel. And whatever kind of political developments or negotiations happen, these are usually the red lines that the empire kind of tries to keep and tries to move forward with. It's a perpetual state that's been since the 90s, of having this laser focused strategy of not only including Sudan in the Middle East, but treating it as kind of the backyard of these countries. And it's contributed to what we're seeing right now. Saudi Arabia and UAE using both SAF and the RSF to fight the war in Yemen. This increased the militarization of communities in Sudan tenfold, because then, where it was about more local control of resources and, along ethnic lines and everything, now there became a monetary incentive for thousands, if not millions, of youth, instead of being within their communities or working anything, doing anything productive, they've now become militarized, but not under any kind of national, sovereign, political and national discourse. This is purely a mercenary state. It started becoming a mercenary state by these things like the war in Yemen. And of course, being a major exporter of gold, I just want to talk briefly about that overlap between all the conflicts that we're seeing right now, the mining industry, and where AFRICOM is. This is pretty much a map of just showing how there's been, the idea of, a resource like gold and gold mining then becoming a catalyst for conflict and for creating militias and militarizing communities, and then breaking down any structured economic development within these countries. And of course, if it was in a national framework where you had these resources, organized by the state and used for development and everything, it wouldn't be a problem. But the characteristic of artisanal mining mixed with armed groups across the region, it starts to make the pattern pretty clear of why we're seeing, pretty much some of the most impoverished countries on the planet, being exploited time and time again, and not seeing an end in sight to this. Of course, when you put these maps together, it starts showing this pattern and how, from the Sahel region, you get into East Africa, you get into South Sudan, you get into Congo, you get into these extremely resource-rich countries, and the perpetual state of warfare that they're kept in. It doesn't become, you have to be a fool to not think that there is a larger plan to either you get in line or you're going to be destabilized, one of the two. Ethiopia can be a witness to that as well, especially if you're taking the arc in Ethiopia from 2018 until now. So maps like this make, the Sahel Confederation pretty much a no-brainer. And it starts becoming very clear why, Goita and Cheni and Traore are taking these steps, and why that idea is starting to spread now on the continent, and people are starting to look at the Sahel Alliance as a possible future for the rest of the continent. How that manifests, that becomes another question. And of course, when you put these maps along with AFRICOM's presence in Africa, then the ask for AFRICOM to leave the US becomes a matter of survival. In order for our countries to survive, we need sovereignty. We need an African discourse. We need a socialist program that would use these resources to directly benefit these communities and these countries and have local control over them. And in that, we need to answer a lot of questions. And I'm in hope that this campaign goes further into drawing out and making recommendations and everything. Whether the African Union might not be the best place to go, but it is one of the places to actually pour it. But there's nothing stronger than people-to-people organizing. This is not the 90s where we were all isolated. Yes?
You're at time, so I hope you're wrapping up.
Okay, I'll wrap up. But yeah, and Sudan, of course, like you look at this map, and Sudan doesn't include physical AFRICOM presence, but it doesn't need to because of the kind of subjugation to the Middle Eastern countries, but also because the biggest U.S. embassy was in Khartoum. And if you look at this map, it says it's an HR center. Well, what does an HR center look like? Why is an HR center in Khartoum, and what the hell is an HR center for AFRICOM? And we basically, as a Sudanese, we have to kind of take a step back and really implore everyone to pay more attention to the conflict in Sudan, because the magnitude of it is astronomical and it's mind-bending. We have over 13 million people displaced as a result of this conflict. And there's no easy solutions to the conflict, but speaking about it and showing solidarity and working together and looking at it again in a regional perspective would help us kind of break the stalemate of, being not sure about talking about Sudan or the conflict in Ethiopia or Congo or South Sudan or why the Sahel is doing what it is. Once we actually zoom out and look at it as a collective regional issue, things start to become clear. So I just want to thank the Black Alliance for Peace again, and I'll wrap up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mosaab, for that incredible presentation and the connections between not only the historical context, but what is to be done or what must be done. Now let's move on. This is a great segue into Mr. Maurice Carney from Friends of the Congo. Maurice Carney is one of the co-founders of Friends of the Congo and currently serves as the organization's executive director. He has pursued a Pan-African solidarity mission for the past 25 years to build a global constituency in support of the Congolese people as they strive to fulfill Lumumba's vision of a free and liberated Congo. Welcome, Maurice.
Thank you, Yolian. Thank you to all the members of BAT for inviting Friends of the Congo to be a part of the discussion. I'd like to address really three points today. One is look at the theoretical underpinning of neocolonialism. Two, look at the new colonial landscape in the Great Lakes region of Africa over the past 3 decades. And then the third issue I'd like to address is the nature of the resistance. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't address the essence of the title of today's discussion, is neocolonialism in the 21st century. And when we talk about neocolonialism, of course, we have to talk about Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, and the one who gave us the theoretical framework for analyzing, assessing where we are in the 21st century. Now, interestingly enough, Nkrumah's book, neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, which was published in 1965, brought with it certain elements. First of all, the United States did all it could to prevent Nkrumah from publishing the book. Neocolonialism led a stage of imperialism. They pressured him. They withdrew aid and prevented aid from getting to the nascent Ghanaian state. And ultimately, within a year of the publishing of the book, Nkrumah was overthrown. He published a book in 1965, then he was overthrown in 1966. His book really is a build on Vladimir Lenin's 1916 capitalism or imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Now, what Nkrumah laid out around neocolonialism is that, in a lot of respects, it represents imperialism in its final, Nkrumah says, in its final and perhaps most dangerous stage. And if you look at the Great Lakes region of the African continent, that has certainly, especially over the past 30 years, that has certainly borne out to be true. Now, Nkrumah says that the essence of neocolonialism is that the state, which is subject to it, is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. But he goes on to say that in reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. So when people ask, we get asked quite a lot, Black leaders, African nations have come out of independence, how can we continue to talk about colonialism? Nkrumah lays it out quite well why we continue to talk about colonialism and neocolonialism. Now, if we look at the Great Lakes region of Africa, there are really 3 capitals that are firmly ensconced in the neocolonial model. We're talking about Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo, talking about Kampala in Uganda, and Kigali in Rwanda. And this web, this triangle of neocolonial or agents of neocolonialism has rendered the people of the region in a death trap for the past 3 decades. And really the trigger point was two key agents of the empire, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, Paul Kagame of Rwanda, who organized to invade Rwanda in 1990, and then in 1994 shot down the plane that killed 2 African presidents, the president of Burundi and the president of Rwanda. And since this period, it has triggered and led to what the United Nations says the deadliest conflict in the world since World War II, where we've seen an estimated 6 million people perish in the heart of the African continent. Now, it's so critical to understand that Washington is playing a vital role in what we see unfolding in the Great Lakes region of the African continent. And probably most tellingly, going back to the Clinton administration in the late 1990s, Clinton ventured to the African continent, and he had a special meeting in Entebbe, in Uganda. Had a summit, they call it the Entebbe Summit for Peace and Prosperity. And coming out of the Entebbe Summit for Peace and Prosperity, they had a joint declaration of principles. And key figures that were part of that Clinton administration, Entebbe undertaking, figures like Yoweri Museveni himself in Uganda. Of course, Paul Kagame, even though he's represented by the president at the time in Rwanda. You had Meles Zenawi out of Ethiopia. And there are a number of other figures. Now, coming out of the Entebbe summit, what the United States did was to put its stamp, its print on these agents of neocolonialism on the African continent. You had then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Susan Rice, and Clinton himself, saying that these leaders, the Kagames, the Musevenis, they represent a new breed of African leaders. They call them Renaissance leaders. They call them Pan-African leaders. And unfortunately, some of our young people on the continent today still see the likes of Kagame and Museveni as Pan-African leaders, even with really fully buying into the propaganda, the high-octane propaganda coming out of Washington. And what these leaders had in common, that was in alignment with the empire, was they'd invaded another African country. They're authoritarian figures. They had the blood of millions of Africans on their hands. And they subscribed to the neoliberal prescriptions and the Washington consensus that Clinton and the United States government was pushing on the African continent. And what they had done in the region, you had the likes of Kagame and Museveni in an effort to shift the dynamics on the continent, where a longtime agent of the United States, Joseph Desiree Mobutu, was ill, old, and the U.S. wanted to ensure that whoever rises to power in the Congo, that they can control. And there's a burgeoning democratic movement coming arising in the Congo, coming out of the end of the Cold War, and they weren't certain that there were any trusted parties that they can rely on. So they went to their agents, Kagame of Rwanda, Museveni of Uganda. They invaded the Congo in 1996. And that invasion, they installed Laurent Desire Kabila as the leader. If you remember Kabila from history, he was with Che, when Che Guevara went to the Congo in 1965 and declared Congo as the epicenter of the battle against colonialism. And he went as far as to say in his diaries, he said, the Congo problem is a world problem. Victory will be continental in its reach and its consequences, and so would defeat. And encountering the likes of Kabila, interestingly enough, Che noted that with leaders like Kabila, the Congo will be colonized for another 100 years. However, with Kabila being installed in power in 1997, he sought to, after being installed by the backing of Rwanda, Uganda, who's backed by the United States, he sought to shake himself loose. He didn't subscribe to the prescriptions coming from Washington, from Albright, Rice, and Clinton himself. And this really started the first resistance of the 21st century to neocolonialism in the heart of the African continent. And what Kabila did, in an effort to shake himself loose, was to reach out to the Southern African development community. Mugabe was head of Zimbabwe at the time, Dos Santos in Angola, also reached out to Namibia, and rallied the Southern African development community to the side of the Congolese people to combat what would be a second invasion on the part of the agents of the United States, Paul Kagame of Rwanda, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. And they were successful in forestalling the capture of the Congo and of the heart of the African continent for the benefit of the empire. Unfortunately, within 3 years of the successful resistance on the part of Kabila and the Southern African development community, Kabila himself was assassinated. And then his son was installed to reset the agenda of Washington in having the heart of the continent being under control of its agents. And that framing, that backdrop is vital for understanding what we see unfolding in the Great Lakes region today. Both Kagame and Museveni, they've been in power for over 3 decades, 30 plus years for Kagame, 40 for Museveni. And they've continued to destabilize, wreak havoc in the east of the Congo in pursuit of Congo's riches, and which they wouldn't have been able to do without support from Washington and certainly UK, France, and Belgium as well. Now, unfortunately, what we see in the Congo itself is, at least with this latest leader, he falls, Felix Tshisekedi, he falls clearly in the camp, the neo-colonial camp as well. So we have these local elites, the Kagames, the Musevenis, the Tshisekidis, who are serving the interests of foreign capital at the expense of the masses of Congolese and oppressed and working class people throughout the Great Lakes of the African continent. And this is an alarm that is sounding to the continent as a whole, because we know if the heart is captured by foreign capital, as we see it's on steroid today with the Felix Tshisekedi of the Congo offering a deal to Donald Trump, where Trump can come in and his cronies and get access to critical minerals, not only to fill their pockets and fuel the industries in the West, but also as an effort to combat the Chinese, who have control of the bulk of Congo's copper and cobalt mines, which are critical to AI industry, critical to so-called green energy transition, critical to electric vehicle industry. We see that these local elites have abandoned their people in their personal interests and also in the interests of foreign capital. So that's what we see unfolding right now in the Great Lakes region of the continent, and it's vital for progressive forces, for revolutionary forces, for people of goodwill, to rally behind the Congolese people as they continue to resist. You have formations throughout the country that are resisting, grounded in the principles of agro-liberation, agroecology, drawing from the works and organizing efforts of Amilcar Cabral in order to inspire a rural movement in the Congo. And for us who are working in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in continent, that's where we are going to find the solutions, where these local communities are mobilizing, engaging in political and popular education, or organizing for control of their land, control of their resources, and local sovereignty. So that's the message that leave today, in spite of the neo-colonial landscape and agents that are working against the people. There is movement in the Congo and in the Great Lakes region, and there's an opportunity for each and every one of us to join in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are holding up the fulcrum on which the African continent swings, right in the heart of Africa, the Congo and the Great Lakes region.
Thank you so much, Maurice Carney, for the incredible analysis and the really important ways that it tied in the broader struggle and geopolitical connections to not just Congo, but the region and the continent as well. Now we're moving on to one of our last, but certainly not least speakers. His name is Mr. Richard Mathenge from the African Continent Moderators Union. Mr. Mathenge is the co-founder of African Tech Workers Union and was a former ChatGPT content moderator team lead, Times Top 100 Most Influential People in AI in 2023, and Top 100 Kenyans 2023. Content moderators who shield billions of social media users from harmful and traumatic material have formed the first ever global trade union alliance to fight for living wages, safe working conditions, and union representation in their industry. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Mathenge. Welcome.
Thanks, Yolian, and thanks, Black Alliance for Peace. I think mine will be as brief as possible. And everyone has actually mentioned it, but I'd like to resonate very well with Ashlyn, who, if I can quote her, she said, reflection of class, characters exploit the picture of what African Content Moderators Union is agitating for, in as far as AI or artificial intelligence in our generation or in our surrounding is concerned. Sometime in 2021, thereabout, in the face of COVID, I was privileged enough to be part of a group that was employed to in an outsourcing organization, a group that was privileged enough to be employed to train data for this big tech organization. And one of them is OpenAI. I had colleagues training data for Facebook, and now it's called Meta. I had colleagues training data for TikTok. We had a common background, and in this common background, first of all, in the face of training this data, or in the face of crisis, we had this opportunity to, address our grievances to the organization that is outsourcing work from outside. And in this manner, when work is being outsourced from outside, there is a tendency of not holding this organization accountable In the face of neocolonialism and scramble for Africa, we got to a point where we had to get our heads together and speak unanimously against the grievances that were actually being perpetrated to our peers. And so we had a sitting to come up with a formidable voice, and this formidable voice is going to was geared towards confronting these organizations, to addressing ethical AI, addressing issues about ethical considerations in the face of neocolonialism and capitalism and the scramble for Africa. And so out of this, we formed the first of its kind African Content Moderators Union. And in my capacity as a former team lead, I was privy to a whole lot of information. I was privy to a whole lot of data, and this data was very sensitive to the point that if I managed to confront the organization to addressing the issues that I had already that was preview in my capacity as a team lead, I would have found myself in hot soup with the organization. And this data was such that the individuals who were working on this data, everyone, 100%, a bigger percentage of these individuals were actually coming from the informal settlement. And there was a deliberate attempt to recruit these individuals from the informal settlements. And the reason being, these individuals were desperate, these individuals are vulnerable, these individuals cannot fight back, these individuals have no muscle to confront the organization head on and tell them, I'm going through this and this, and the fact that I'm going through this and this, you should be in a better position to address it as my supervisors. And so in light of the theme that is presented to us, the 21st century neocolonialism, capitalism, and the ongoing scramble for something that is valuable. You can only scramble, you can only fight for something that is needful, that you see you need at the end of the day. And Africans hold this a very it's untapped labor, and we have this rich valuable minerals, and we have this richness in as far as labor is concerned. We have this richness in as far as minerals. This is what is big tech organization, Western world, to scramble for what is available here. And I cannot emphasize any better than how my previous panelists have actually pointed out. The need to scramble for Africa is on an all-time high. Addressing issues in as far as employment, addressing issues in as far as labor is concerned, addressing issues in the face of what is untapped here in the continent is concerned. So the need for unionizing.
Hello, Brother Richard. With the
Yes.
interpreters and everyone's having a hard time, your reception is very choppy. So maybe if you turn your video off, it will help your audio come in clearer.
Okay, enough. Can you hear me right now?
Yes. Keep talking so we can.
Thank you. So the need for scramble for what is untapped here in Africa is on an all-time high to address the interests of our colonial masters in the face of neo-colonialism and the scramble for Africa. And so that is that paints the picture of what exactly African Content Moderators Union is agitating for, is fighting for. We are fighting for unionizing and helping, fighting for the rights of individuals who are actually employed in these artificial intelligence organizations. Thank you. Yolian?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mathenge, Richard Mathenge, for the background and making the connection between labor, workers' rights, and particularly this new kind of landscape that we're dealing with as it relates to AI, in the digital frontier. So thank you so much. Now we can open things up for questions. Please feel free to add the questions in the Q&A box. And if you can try to put it in the box as opposed to the chat, you can either direct them at a particular panelist or in general. So, let's see. We've got a few minutes, so we can probably fit a few questions. It seems like one person kind of put this timeline together, and I think maybe the question I'm getting out of this is maybe the connection, if at all, between Russia, the relationship that Russia has in Sudan. If you could speak to that, Mosaab.
Yeah, sure. Russia's had a long-term relationship in Sudan. It goes back, to mid-20th century, like through independence and everything. During the Bashir regime, though, there was Russia was kind of supporting the Bashir regime along with China and Iran. There was a kind of a discrepancy between what Russia was doing then and then the new role for Russia. One of the biggest issues that Sudanese have had with Russia is the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group has been a big supporter of the RSF. And this is kind of more what was making the U.S. kind of nervous. Of course, the issue of the Battle of the Red Sea and, who would get the Port Sudan military base. The UAE was vying for it. The Russians were vying for it. Turkey was vying for it. So there was during the period from 2019 until before the war, there was huge disarray as far as the direction that Sudan would take. Would it go and join the BRICS, or would it fully normalize with Israel and work with the U.S.? But there wasn't. It was factions inside of Sudan fighting and kind of looking for partners at the same time. Yes, the framework agreement, the U.S. was heavily involved in it. And the way the U.S. is looking at it if a civilian government like Hamdok comes in and takes power, they've already given a lot of concessions to the U.S. One example is that as soon as Bashir was removed and transitional government came in, the Trump administration was saying that the Sudanese now have to pay for the attacks on the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. They have to pay for the attack of the USS Cole in 2000. So, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Clearly, the transitional government doesn't have that money, but it was a way to pressure and coerce them. Like, you have to pay this money or you're going to be enabling terrorists in the region. It was just like typical like Trump administration type thing. But the real reason wasn't for them to get any kind of leverage with, terrorism or anything like that. It really was about kind of having Sudan firmly within the Israel framework. So all of this Blinken going back and forth and Victoria Nuland and everything, they were operating under that larger umbrella. So they saw the security sector reform as a way for them to kind of lead that process and come to kind of like a 2005 thing where you had, Colin Powell was the one who was, brokered the peace deal between Bashir and John Garang. They wanted to kind of Biden and, Biden was kind of, already a little bit senile, I think. I don't think he was paying too much attention. This was purely the U.S. security state. And by the kind of leading the compass for it was the Mosaab to actually have a chokehold on Sudan. Now, this is where the contradiction is also like, okay, well, does that mean that the military forces were against this policy? No, it's just different handlers. And that's the chaos, the political chaos that's in Sudan, is that big forces have different handlers. The Sudan Armed Forces with Burhan is clearly in a chokehold by Egypt because Egypt has had its military intelligence for a long time compromising any political process in Sudan and choking the military and keeping the military kind of on its side, while the RSF was clearly being funded and supported by the UAE. So it was kind of like the chaos that ensued was of this insistence to, look at, and this was used by the people who actually started the war, is to look at the transitional government and make them seem as like the ultimate compradors, which is also, there are some of them that are actually going along with the U.S. program.
Excuse me, Mosaab, I've got to interrupt you. I hope you're wrapping up. We want every panelist to answer a question. I hate being the timekeeper, but anyway, there's all this tension between this great analysis and having to move forward.
Gotcha. Again, you have to stop me because I could actually go on even more. So thank you, Margaret. But yeah, in essence, there's multiple factors. But yes, the U.S. trying to coerce the transitional period was one of them as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mosaab. And we have a few more questions that we want to get through. Sifting through some of the similar ones, one of the things that came up for Ashlyn Adhiambo was a couple of things. And I guess I'll encompass it in one question. How would you describe the comprador class within Kenya? And how do we, one person asked, what do we make of maybe this insurgent campaign such as that of Boniface Mwangi in Kenya? And then kind of the second part of that question is how do we understand Kenya's participation in the occupation of Haiti? Sorry, that was a lot.
On the comparator class, I think I had defined it before, but it's basically the reactionary leeching class. It's the rich class in the country. So we don't have capitalist class. We have servants to foreign capital. This is the class managing the state, managing multinational firms. So they have their stakeholders in in the multinational corporations, in huge tech companies, all those are compada class. So there is no difference between compada, and I know it's comprador, but the people say compada, so it's better for us because it's easier for the masses. So the compada class is basically the filthy rich class that has subjugated the majority of people in the country. But when you do class analysis, obviously in the compada class, you'll get the class strata. So as to keep my analysis short, it's the rich class in the country. Their percentage is 0.2%, subjugating the rest of the 99.8 poor Kenyans. On the on the uprising in the streets, I think it's unfair to say that the struggles and gains of the people can be accredited to one individual. I think when Kenyans go out and protest, like for the last 2 years, we've had protests over the finance bill. So essentially in 2024 was the anti-finance bill protest. Then in 2025, it was more of trying to recognize the Gen Z protesters that died in the streets in 2024, yet the government has not done anything about it. But we are saying, but what we must clarify is that any protest, any strike, any demonstration is as a result of the kind of pinch, the kind of harsh realities that the people are experiencing. And it's because they could not take it no longer. So they have their only site of struggle becomes the streets. So the ongoing, the consecutive protest we've had in Kenya cannot be accredited to only Boniface Mwangi, or to maybe before we had protest and we have our former prime minister. Usually he's the one given credit over this. But for us, we say that all these protests are the gains and struggle of the masses. And each and every time, the credit should go back to the masses because we understand they're increasingly being enlightened and gaining consciousness of how backward and how reactionary the system is. So I'd say the insurgency is part of the struggle of the people that did not start only in 2024, but has been a product of the Kenyan political revolutions that have been before. And the last one was on Haiti. Okay. The issue of deploying Kenyan police to Haiti, first of all, we strongly condemn this move by the government, because even after a lot of petitions were taken to court, and court even declared this as an illegal, an illegal action by the Kenyan state, still the government pursued that mission. And they pursued it because it was a deal. So there is no way they wouldn't send the police, yet they had gotten a few funds to do something for the comprador class. And, they wouldn't go back on their word because already money was given out. So for us, that was an illegal process that not only undermined our constitution, but also undermined the popular voice of the people who were greatly against it, because they said, this would actually lessen and reduce the sovereignty of the Haitian people. So we want to express our solidarity with them, and we continue to reject such actions by our government. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ashlyn, for the clarity in your message and your explanation of the comprador class. That was very clear, and I believe we all understood how great of a breakdown you provided. Now, the question we have next is for Mr. Maurice around understanding, if you could just kind of briefly break down, the recent agreement between the Trump administration attempting to access DRC minerals and exchanging arms and the kind of the security around that. Yeah, if you could just kind of briefly break down what that looks like and what do we need to know around this agreement.
Sure, thank you. Just quickly, there's an agreement signed in Washington on June 27th of this year between the Rwandan government and the Congolese government. And it's worth bearing again, the fact that this agreement was signed in Washington. In his last letter to his wife, Pauline Lumumba, he said that the day will come when history will speak. He said, but it will not be the history which will be taught in Brussels, Paris, or Washington. Unfortunately, to this day, the history of the heart of the African continent is being written in Washington, with the head of the empire in tow with its agents. And the deal really, it offers everyone except the Congolese people something, right? With Kagame, he gets to cleanse the extraction of minerals from the Congo that he's been extracting illicitly for over 3 decades, where U.S. investors come in to invest in the region, and they call it Regional Economic Cooperation. With Tshisekedi, he's under pressure from Kagame-backed militia groups in the east of the country. The agreement enables him gives him more surety in holding on to power. And you have Qatar, who's a part of the equation as well. They just unveiled a $100 billion plus investment for the African continent. The highest portion of that, 21 billion, is supposed to go towards the Congo. So they are a factor in the equation. And then you have the billionaire class in tow with Donald Trump, whose interests, of course, economic, in the sense that his finance campaign co-chair, a gentleman by the name of Gentry Beach out of Texas, he's eyeing coltan mine in the east of the Congo that's captured by militia groups in Rwanda. You have the likes of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Michael Bloomberg. They have a company called Cobalt Metals out of Berkeley, California. They've raised $1 billion this year so far in order to pursue lithium mines in the southeast of the Congo. You have Eric Prince, who's putting his firm up to provide security for the mines that are going to be exploited by U.S. investors. You have the International Finance Development Corporation out of Washington, joined with the Wall Street hedge fund that's raised $5 billion in order to secure all of these investments that are going to take place. So the Oakland Institute out of California, they published a report called Profit or Peace, dealing with the peace deal, and they did a pretty good economic analysis of the peace deal. So, and then in the context of all of that, there's this race, this scramble, as this title asserts, for access to critical minerals. As I shared with you, China has about 80% of the critical mineral, the copper, cobalt, in the Congo, and the Trump administration is trying to get an inroad. And this is not party related. It's built on the Biden administration in an effort to combat China's Belt and Road Initiative, not just in the Congo, but globally, the Global South. They launched what they call the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. That's an agreement, partnership with the European Union, the G7, the United States, where they come together to combat China on a global scale, where they argue they're going to provide value-added infrastructure locally for a global South country. We know that's not true, but that's what they're proffering. And it just so happens that Congo is the testing ground for that, where they launch what they call, invest in what they call the Lobito Corridor, which is a rail line that runs from the heart of the mining districts right out through Lobito port in Angola, which Biden visited at the end of his term in 2024. So I guess the main point is that this is not what we see today is a continuation of 1845, and as progressive folks, as radical, as people throughout the globe, we really have to rally behind brothers and sisters in the heart of the African continent in the same fashion that Nkrumah did, that Modibo Keita did, that Ahmed Sekou Touré did, coming out of independence, right? And they recognize the centrality in the heart of the African continent, the future of Africa. So the extent to which the Sahel states, Assimi Goïta, Chiani, or Traoré are going to be successful is directly dependent on what happens to the heart. If the heart is captured, then the rest of the continent will not be able to advance. And none other than Larry Devlin of the CIA, he said it in his book, Chief of State in Congo. He said, we had to overthrow Lumumba. If we didn't overthrow Lumumba, not only would we have lost the Congo, we would have lost all of that. So whether it's the CIA, the enemies of Africa, or Che Guevara, friends of Africa, we see the centrality of the Congo to the future of Africa is raised on both sides.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Maurice Carney, for the breakdown. Very brief, although I know there's so many other details, but I think this really shows us what's this path that's being laid out of the continuation of the scramble for Africa, and particularly in Congo, and raising again our awareness of the centrality of Congo. Let me see. I know we're running out of time, although there were so many questions. And if you could maybe briefly, Mr. Richard Mathenge, speak to the relationship between African governments and these tech companies. I think it's interesting. Mr. Maurice just kind of spoke to an element of that from externally, and I'm curious if you could speak to kind of that internal relationship. Particularly as it relates to these AI companies and your experiences. About a minute or two, or
sure. And I believe the relationship is it's quite cordial, and the reason why I'm saying this is in the face of electioneering period after every 5 years or every 4 years. Depending on the respective constitutions of the African countries. This is actually part of the manifestos that prospective governments or prospective leaders campaign for, and they campaign on the platform that we are going to create 1 million+ jobs every year. And with this, artificial intelligence organizations or tech organizations form, sort of like a memoranda or agreements with these governments, such that if you come against, like for instance, my case, if I go against this big tech organization, I will be in bad blood with the government. I will be in bad blood. I will be deemed as, anti government, And so this is what we are talking about. There is a cordial relationship between this tech organization, or for lack of a better word, there is a cordial relationship, and the cordial relationship is just in the name of creating employment, helping the government to create employment for these young people. Ashlyn had just spoke about, a revolution last year, and this revolution was actually the vast of these individuals who took part in the revolution, individuals who are Gen Zs, and these individuals are idle. These individuals they are not employed. These individuals are just staying at home without any income at the end of the month. And how best do they engage themselves in letting the government aware that we have grievances, and these grievances are actually based on the promises you made, the unkept promises that you made during the electioneering period. So that's, unfortunately, that's the relationship between big tech organizations and the governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists today. We did an incredible job like breaking down a lot of these seemingly complex and complicated systems, but rather showing us how interconnected every one of these issues of around these states are, and what to do about it in some ways. So thank you all again for joining this webinar today, as this is the kickoff of our month of action around the Shutdown AFRICOM campaign. We are continuing to take endorsements from organizations, so feel free to, if you are interested in the work that we are doing and want to endorse this, visit our website, which we'll have linked here, blackallianceforpeace.com. Please also join the U.S. Out of Africa Network if you are a member of an organization that is doing similar work around this, whether that you're on the continent or in the diaspora. And please be aware of upcoming events across the United States and within our citywide alliances. Thank you all so much for joining.
Very quickly, thank you, Yolian. I want to thank all of you for joining us, our amazing panelists, Ashlyn, Adhiambo, Maurice, Carney, Richard, Mathenge, Mosaab, Baba, our interpreters. They are wonderful. Thank you so much for the interpreters. Thank you so much, Yolian, for doing such a great job moderating. And go to the website, have your organization endorse. And this is the kickoff. Remember, it's just the beginning of the month of action. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.